When we hear about the major prophets in the Bible, it's easy to think of them as five separate, really long, and let's be honest, kind of intimidating books. But what if I told you they're not separate books at all? What if they're actually five acts in one single epic story? A story about how a world completely falls apart and the promise of how it's all going to be put back together again. So, that's the big question, right? We're going to look past the individual names, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, to find the one powerful thread that weaves them all together into a single narrative. Here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about the prophets on a megaphone to kind of set the scene. Then we'll look at a nation's warning signs before making a huge pivot to hope in the ruins. After that, we'll explore the vision of an unshakable kingdom. And finally, we'll see how all the pieces come together. It's a journey from total ruin to incredible restoration. All right, so let's set the stage. Who were these guys, really? And what was their whole deal? First off, the name Major Prophets. It doesn't mean they were more important than the others. It's actually just because their books are longer. That's it. These five books were written during one of the most chaotic times in Israel's history. I mean, the entire nation was basically teetering on a cliff's edge, right between survival and complete collapse. And this is the absolute best way to picture them. They weren't just authors sitting in a quiet room. No way. They were delivering urgent, high-stakes messages from God himself. They were like God's megaphones, shouting, trying to get people's attention, to warn them about the disaster they were sprinting towards. Which brings us to the heart of the problem. What were they shouting about? Well, they saw these deep, systemic cracks in their society that were about to bring the whole thing crashing down. Okay, check this out. You have Jeremiah standing right in the middle of the temple, the most sacred place in their entire world. And he asks this explosive question. He accuses them of turning God's house into a den of robbers. Basically, he's saying their religion was just a mask they were using to cover up all kinds of injustice and corruption. This was not a polite suggestion. It was a bombshell. And this is what happens next. This is the tragic result. The warnings were ignored. The Book of Lamentations opens with this absolutely heartbreaking line about Jerusalem. The city that was once packed with people is now silent, empty, and alone. It's the direct consequence of the problem Jeremiah was screaming about. So the first part of our story is all about judgment. You've got Isaiah exposing the sin, Jeremiah digging deeper and demanding real, genuine change from the heart, not just empty rituals. And then Lamentations, well, that's the gut-wrenching diary of what it looked like when the nation finally hit rock bottom. This is the ruin part of the story, for sure. But right here, right in the middle of all the rubble and despair, the entire story takes a hard turn. The megaphones don't just go quiet, they start broadcasting a brand new message, one of incredible, almost unbelievable hope. And it kicks off with Isaiah. After chapters and chapters of judgment, the tone just completely flips. Comfort, comfort my people. It's this powerful promise that the destruction is not the final chapter. A new path is being cleared, a new day is coming. Then Jeremiah, the same guy who warned about the den of robbers, he gives us the blueprint for this fresh start. He calls it a new covenant. The old agreement was written on stone tablets, but the problem was never the rules, it was the human heart. So God's solution is radical. He says, I'm going to write my ways directly on your hearts. This is a promise of a complete internal rewiring. Ezekiel hears that and basically says, hold my beer. He takes Jeremiah's promise and just amps it up. He uses even more direct language. God will give them a new heart and a new spirit. This isn't just patching things up. It's a full-on heart transplant. It's a promise that God himself would put his spirit inside people so they can actually live this new way. You see the pattern here, right? It just keeps building. We go from a new covenant to a new heart, empowered by a new spirit, and it's all pointing towards a completely new creation. This is the restoration part of our story really starting to take shape. But the vision doesn't stop there. It gets even bigger. It expands from just changing individual people to changing the entire world. The prophets start looking past all the broken kingdoms of their time to one kingdom that can never, ever fail. And this is where Daniel comes in. He has these wild visions of human empires rising and falling. He describes them as these violent, monstrous beasts that are ultimately temporary. But then, cutting through all that chaos, he sees something else entirely, a different kind of kingdom, one that is eternal, divine, and absolutely unshakable. And this right here is the climax of that vision. A mysterious figure shows up, someone described as one like the Son of Man. It's a title that shows he's both human and at the same time has divine authority. And unlike those beastly kings from the earth, this one comes from heaven, and he's given a kingdom that will last forever, over everyone. This is the ultimate answer to all the world's brokenness, a perfect king with a perfect kingdom. Okay, so let's tie this all together. We've got all these incredible promises, a new covenant, a new spirit, an eternal king. How do they all fit? Well, the big takeaway is that these are not separate, random promises. They're all different puzzle pieces that, when you put them together, create one clear picture. And in the Christian tradition, these messages are all seen as converging on a single figure, a coming Messiah who would fulfill every single one of these prophetic hopes. This chart just lays it out so clearly. Isaiah gives us the atoning servant, the one who would suffer for others. Jeremiah points to the one who would bring the new covenant. Ezekiel shows us how he'd give us a renewing spirit. And Daniel caps it all off with the vision of the eternal king, the Son of Man who would rule forever. Each prophet gave us a crucial piece of the portrait. And that really brings us to the end. This massive story, spanning centuries, is ultimately about restoration, about God making all things new. So as we look at our own lives, in our own messy world, it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. If this ancient story is all about restoration, what needs restoring today?